how would you characterize that so-called consensus? Is that associated with this idea? I talked to Richard Franzen about this recently. Is that associated with the idea that like 97% of scientists agree that, well, it isn't clear what they agree, that's the issue, is that climate change is a severe and catastrophic problem, which is, that statement in itself is not true by any stretch of the imagination.
Exactly.
What's the consensus here?
Okay, the issue is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They did their first assessment report in like 1991, and following that, I mean, that was a good report. It was a good assessment at the time. And then the powers that be says we need to strive for consensus in our statements. And so this sort of narrowed the framing, and the people they were picking to be on the committee were people who were all going to agree. And so they were working to manufacture a consensus. You know, it was their view of how the policy process deals with uncertainty. So it was sort of a speaking consensus to power approach. And this was like formalized by the IPCC. And, you know, people challenging the consensus, and there's many dimensions to it, but the most fundamental one is that most of the warming that we've seen since 1950 is caused by humans. I mean, that's the most central consensus type statement.
That there is warming, even though now the narrative has changed, that there is warming. There's a certain idea about its potential magnitude, and then hypothetically the consensus is that, what, about 50% of that is due to human activity?
No. They used to make the statement more than half, but they really meant 100%.
Okay, but there's certainly no scientific consensus that 100% of the global warming that's occurring at the moment is anthropogenic. That, I don't believe it. Right? Am I wrong about that?
No, there isn't. The science, okay. There's no measure. I mean, when you have a complex, highly uncertain situation like this, the issue of consensus is scientifically meaningless. It's only meaningful, you know, for political purposes. This whole idea of speaking consensus to power, that was some pathway, you know, to policymaking. It hasn't really turned out to be. There's no consensus. The most
well, it's also a preposterous claim scientifically, because the way science works is that a great scientist is the first person who challenges the consensus. That's kind of how you define a great scientist. And one of the things that's so wonderful about science is that it can reveal when the universal consensus is wrong. And it's powerful in its methods precisely because of that. And you know that as a practicing researcher, is that the probability that you're going to do a study and that the data is going to reveal the consensus of your lab's theory, the validity of the consensus of your lab's theory, is basically zero. Something unexpected is going to crop up when you actually test your idea against reality itself. So the idea that science is consensus-based is
wrong. It's wrong.
Well,
okay.
It's amazing that the idea got anywhere.
Okay, look at the social factors in play. Okay, there was a big drive by the UN, you know, to deal with dangerous anthropogenic climate change. Again, this was a 1992 treaty before we even had any evidence of human-caused warming at all. Okay, and then you had scientists become invested in this, you know, in their career goals and the funding that comes into the field and all of this kind of stuff. There was this sort of social contract between the scientists and the policymakers that perpetuated this situation. And, you know, and they were, the policymakers, we need, you know, more, you know, we need more and more confident statements from the IPCC, even though the dimensions of the problem were growing and growing and growing every year, and clearly becoming more complex and obvious that there were a lot of things that we didn't understand.